Mind Shifters Radio. I'm Tim Hayes. I'm your host for the first hour, and today is Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025. As always, we're grateful to everyone who's joining us here today, whether you're listening live or through the archives, as we spend another couple of hours teaching and supporting people in using some of the most powerful, effective, efficient, and accessible tools I've ever encountered. These tools are available absolutely free through the tireless efforts of Dr. Michael and Jeannie Ryce on the website at whyagain.org. If you go to that website and click on the two words that say Start Here in the upper left-hand corner, it will take you to a page where you can download and read Chapter 24 of Dr. Michael Ryce's book. His book is titled, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? And that chapter of the book contains a narrative description and explanation of the primary tool in this work. That tool is called the Reality Management Worksheet, sometimes called the Reality Management Wake-Up Sheet. And it's a tool I've been using to great effect for over 20 years to improve the quality of my life and most of my relationships, and to turn any negative emotional experience I have into part of the infallible guidance system that each and every one of us has been given. You can also download the actual worksheet process itself from that web page. It's a simple PDF file. Click the link, download it, print it off, copy it as often as you'd like, and use it over and over again absolutely free. You can also download from that page a whole host of audio files of shows just like this one, in which people have called the internet show and they've been stepped through the worksheet process. So if you choose to listen to those even repeatedly, they can serve as a powerful tutorial for you to help you get maximum benefit from these tools in the shortest amount of time possible. You can also, if you should so choose to do so, go to your app store. And once in the app store, you can type in the three words Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And if you do that before you're done typing the word forgiveness, you'll see the glowing heart icon. If you choose to tap on that, it will let you download a completely free and private app that contains the Reality Management Worksheet. It contains an abbreviated version of that worksheet process, and it contains a copy of the Drag-On Klingon game, which is a wonderful way to introduce these tools to even younger audiences. We hope people do all of that soon and often, primarily because it tends to improve the quality of people's lives the more they actively apply these tools in their lives. And secondarily, because it tends to prompt comments, questions, answers, and testimonials. If you have any of those to share with us, we'd appreciate you doing so by giving us a call at 563. Yep, that was autopilot. By sending me an email. You can email me at tjh@mindshifters-academy.org. And or you can email Jeannie at jeanie@whyagain.org. That's whyagain.org. And if we get a question or a comment or a testimonial from you, we will address it on the internet show, and then as time allows, send you a notification about what day and time that occurred, so you can listen back to the archives for your feedback or input. And alternatively, you can, if you're listening to us through the internet at live.needle.com/mindshiftersradio, we're glad you're here. We're glad you're choosing to spend time with us. And yet, from that position, you don't have the ability to type in a comment or go live in a voice call. So to do that, you would need to go to your app store and type in Needle, Nedl. And what it will pop up is an AI tuner for live radio. If you download that app, install it, and then open it and sign in, it will let you have the option to type in a comment or tap the phone icon and enter into an actual live call. And we greatly appreciate whenever anybody does that, whether they send us an email or they send us a comment or they call with and talk to us directly voice to voice because it makes it infinitely easier for us to live into our intention with this work. The intention we have with this work is to be of service, and that is just infinitely easier to do when we know how these things are landing for you. And um, so we have plenty of time for comments or questions. Um, we're only about 5 or 6 minutes into the time we have for today in the first hour of the show. And what I'm prepared to do today, without comments or questions from other people, is get into a little bit more of the discussion and some science about how it is that we create our emotions. And the impetus for this is that on Monday, when one person called and said, I'd like to give a public service announcement about a couple different documentaries that are available about what's happening in the ongoing conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis and other people that are involved over there in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, etc. And as one person was calling in live to talk about that on Monday, another person was on the app typing um, angry comments that included swearing and name calling. And so I began talking yesterday about some of the critical fundamentals of the work that we teach. We teach it here on the Mind Shifters radio show. We teach it in the Mind Shifters support groups on Tuesday and Thursday nights from 6:30 to 9 p.m. Central Time. And it's basically what's taught in the Course in Miracles and the Way of Mastery and the entire body of work that Dr. Michael Ryce has amassed over the past 50 years. And I was making some comments about that based on the uh, the prep I had done Monday night, and it involved things like what I've learned about how it's so beneficial not to continue to talk about content when my emotional processing is at an elevated level. Sometimes we use the word triggered. Sometimes we use a scale from 0 to 10 and we say, um, the the triggering point for a lot of people where their logic goes offline. Um, if you consider a scale from 0 to 10, for most people, they're going offline logically happens about the 6.5 or 7 on the scale of 0 to 10. And once that happens, all of the good tools and techniques and experience and life experience that we've amassed over the years that might help us calm down or think more clearly or dismantle our upset is offline and we're not able to get access to it. So, what we talk to people about is if that's the case, the best skill we could learn is not how to calm down. The best skill we can learn is how to stay monitoring our earliest warning signs physically, mentally, emotionally, that we're getting triggered, that we're in an upset pattern. Because what we understand with this work is I'm the one that creates my upset. I also began talking yesterday in a review of how most people don't want to hear about dismantling their upset They want to just keep the conversation going to have multiple comments about how they're right and the other person's wrong. And one of the things that I pointed out is that if I find myself in that situation where I don't want to hear about how useful it is for me to dismantle my upset before proceeding with a conversation, then I simply doom myself to repeating the conflict, pain, and suffering of my bloodlines, and in fact, the conflict, pain, and suffering of all humanity. Whereas if I can diffuse my upset, sort out my emotions, understand how I'm creating them, choose a position of compassion and calm and centeredness and connectedness and creativity, then I'm much more likely to enjoy the, the results of any conversations I have. I step into a space where conflict resolution becomes possible. But that's only after I've taken 100% responsibility for the emotions I create. Well, I get a lot of pushback on this from people from time to time. So I thought today that I would share some writing from a book titled How Emotions Are Made: The Secret Life of the Brain. And this is a book by Lisa Feldman Barrett, Barrett. And her introduction is titled The 2,000-Year-Old Assumption. And Lisa writes, on December 14th, 2012, the deadliest school shooting in U.S. history took place at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. 26 people inside the school, including 20 children, were massacred by a lone gunman. Several weeks after this horror, I watched the governor of Connecticut, Daniel Malloy, give his annual State of the State speech on television. He spoke in a strong and animated voice for the first 3 minutes, thanking individuals for their service, and then he began to address the Newtown tragedy. He said, quote, "We have all walked a very long and very dark road together. What befell Newtown is not something we thought possible in any of Connecticut's beautiful towns or cities. And yet, in the midst of one of the worst days in our history, we also saw the best of our state. Teachers and therapists that sacrificed their lives protecting students." Close quote. Lisa writes, as the governor spoke the last two words, protecting students, his voice caught in his throat ever so slightly. If you weren't paying close attention, you might have missed it. But that tiny waver devastated me. My stomach instantly knotted into a ball. My eyes flooded. The TV camera panned to the crowd where other people had started to sob as well. As for Governor Malloy, he stopped speaking and was gazing downward. Emotions like Governor Malloy's and mine seem primal. They seem to be hardwired into us. They seem to be reflexively deployed. They seemed to be shared with all our fellow humans. When triggered, they seem to unleash themselves in each of us in basically the same way. My sadness was like Governor Malloy's sadness, which was just like the crowd's sadness. Humanity has understood sadness and other emotions in this way for over 2,000 years. But at the same time, if humanity has learned anything from centuries of scientific discovery, it is that things aren't always what they appear to be. The time honored story of emotion goes something like this. We all have emotions built in from birth. They are distinct. They are recognizable phenomena inside us. When something happens in the world, whether it's a gunshot or a flirtatious glance, our emotions come on quickly and automatically as if someone had flipped a switch. We broadcast emotions on our faces by way of smiles, frowns, scowls, and other characteristic expressions that anyone can easily recognize. Our voices reveal our emotions through laughter, shouts, and cries. Our body posture betrays our feelings with every gesture and slouch. Modern science has an account that fits this story, which I will now call the classical view of emotion. According to this view, the waver in Governor Malloy's voice launched a chain reaction that began in my brain. A particular set of neurons, you could call it the sadness circuit, a particular set of neurons leapt into action and caused my body and my face to respond in certain specific ways. My brow furrowed, I frowned, my shoulders stooped, and I cried. Now, this proposed circuit also triggered physical changes inside my body, causing my heart rate and breathing to speed up, my sweat glands to activate, my blood vessels to constrict. This collection of movements on the inside and outside of my body are said to be like a quote fingerprint, close quotes. A fingerprint that uniquely identifies sadness, much like your own fingerprints uniquely identify you. The classical view of emotion holds that we have many such emotional circuits in our brains, and each is said to cause a distinct set of changes, that is, a fingerprint. Perhaps an annoying coworker triggers your quote anger neurons, close quotes. So your blood pressure rises, you scowl, you yell, and you feel the heat of fury. Or an alarming news story triggers your quote fear neurons, close quotes, so that your heart races and you freeze and feel a flash of dread. Because we experience anger, happiness, surprise, and other emotions as clear and identifiable states of being, it seems reasonable to assume that each emotion has a defining, underlying pattern in the brain and body. Our emotions, according to the classical view, are artifacts of our evolution, having long ago been advantageous for survival, and they are now a fixed component of our biological nature. As such, the classical view says they are universal, and people of every age, in every culture, in every part of the world should experience sadness more or less the way you do, and more or less as did our hominin ancestors who roamed the African savanna a million or millions of years ago. I say, quote, more or less, close quotes, because no one believes that faces, bodies, and brain activity look exactly the same for each time someone is sad. Your heart rate and breathing and blood flow won't always change by the same amount. Your brow might not furrow as much or as little as someone else's, by chance or by custom. So, emotions are thus thought to be a kind of brute reflex, very often at odds with our rational thoughts. The primitive part of your brain wants you to tell your boss he's an idiot, but your deliberative side knows that doing so would get you fired, so you restrain yourself. This kind of internal battle between emotion and reason is one of the great narratives of Western civilization. It helps define you as human. Without rationality, you are merely an emotional beast. This view of emotions has been around for millennia in various forms. Plato believed a version of it. So did Hippocrates, Aristotle, the Buddha, Rene Descartes. Sigmund Freud, and Charles Darwin. Today, prominent thinkers such as Steven Pinker, Paul Ekman, and the Dalai Lama also offer up descriptions of emotions that are rooted in this thing I'm calling the classical view. The classical view is found in virtually every introductory college textbook on psychology and in most magazine and newspaper articles that discuss emotion. Preschools throughout America hang posters displaying the smiles, frowns, and pouts that are supposed to be the universal language of the faith for recognizing emotions. Facebook even commissioned a set of emoticons inspired by Darwin's writings. The classical view is also entrenched in our culture. Television shows like Lie to Me and Daredevil are predicated on the assumption that your innermost feelings are exposed by your heart rate or facial movements. Sesame Street teaches children that emotions are distinct things inside of us seeking expression in the face and body, as does the Pixar movie Inside Out. Companies like Affectiva and Realize offer to help businesses detect their customers' feelings through emotion analytics. In the NBA draft, the Milwaukee Bucks evaluate a player's psychological character and personality issues, and they assess them for team chemistry from facial expressions. And for several decades, the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, based some of its advanced agent training on the classical view of emotions. More significantly, the classical view of emotion is embedded in our social institutions. The American legal system assumes that emotions are part of an inherent animal nature and cause us to perform foolish and even violent acts unless we control them with our rational thoughts. In medicine, researchers study the health effects of anger, supposing that there's a single pattern of changes in the body that goes by that name. People suffering from a variety of mental illnesses, including children and adults diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, these people are taught how to recognize facial configurations for specific emotions, ostensibly to help them communicate and relate to others. And yet, despite the distinguished intellectual pedigree of the classical view of emotion, and despite its immense influence in our culture and society, there is abundant scientific evidence that this view cannot possibly be true. Even after a century of effort, scientific research has not revealed a consistent physical fingerprint for even a single emotion. When scientists attach electrodes to a person's face and measure how much facial muscles actually move during the experience of an emotion, they find tremendous variety, not uniformity. They find the same variety, or the same absence of fingerprints, when they study the body and the brain. You can experience anger with or without a spike in your blood pressure. You can experience fear with or without an amygdala, which is the brain region historically tagged as the home of fear. To be sure, hundreds of experiments offer some evidence of the classical view, and hundreds more cast that evidence into doubt. The only reasonable scientific conclusion, in my opinion, is that emotions are not what we typically think they are. So, what are they really? Well, when scientists set aside the classical view and just look at the data, a radically different explanation for emotion comes to light. In short, we find that your emotions are not built in, but made from more basic parts. We find that your emotions are not universal, but they vary from culture to culture. We find that they are not universal or triggered, but they are created by you. They emerge as a combination of the physical properties of your body in conjunction with a flexible brain that wires itself to whatever environment it develops in combination with your culture and your upbringing, which are the things that provide that environment. Emotions are real, and yet emotions are not real in the objective sense that molecules or neurons are real. Emotions are real in the same sense that money is real. That is, money is hardly an illusion, but it is a product of human agreement. This view, which I will call the theory of constructed emotion, offers a very different interpretation of the events during Governor Malloy's speech. When the governor's voice caught in his throat, it did not trigger a brain circuit for sadness inside me, thereby causing a distinctive set of bodily changes. That's not what happened. Rather, I felt sadness in that moment because I was raised in a certain culture where I learned long ago that the emotion of sadness is something that may occur when certain bodily feelings coincide with the news of a terrible loss. So, using bits and pieces of past experience, such as my knowledge of shootings and my previous sadness about them, my brain rapidly predicted what my body should do to cope with such tragedy. Its predictions caused my thumping heart, my flushed face, and the knots in my stomach. They directed me to cry, which is an action that would calm my nervous system, and they made the resulting sensations meaningful as an instance of sadness. In this manner, my brain constructed my experience of emotion. My particular movements and sensations were not a fingerprint for sadness. With different predictions, my skin would cool rather than flush, and my stomach would remain unknotted, yet my brain could still transform the resulting sensations into that feeling of sadness. Not only that, but my original thumping heart, flushed face, knotted stomach, and tears could become meaningful as a different emotion, such as anger or fear, instead of sadness. Or in a very different situation, like a wedding celebration, those same sensations could become joy or gratitude. If this explanation doesn't make complete sense or even sounds counterintuitive so far, believe me, I'm right there with you. After Governor Malloy's speech, as I came back to myself, wiping my tears, I was reminded that no matter what I know about emotions as a scientist, I still experience them very much the way the classical view conceives them. My sadness felt like an instantly recognizable wave of bodily changes and feelings that overwhelmed me as a reaction to tragedy and loss. If I were not a scientist using experiments to reveal that the emotions are in fact made and not triggered, I would trust my immediate experience. The classical view of emotion remains compelling despite the evidence against it, precisely because it's intuitive. The classical view also provides reassuring answers to deep fundamental questions like, where do you come from evolutionarily speaking? Are you responsible for your actions when you get emotional? Do your experiences accurately reveal the world outside you? The theory of constructed emotion answers such questions differently. It's a different theory of human nature that helps you see yourself and others in a new and more scientifically justified light. The theory of constructed emotion might not fit the way you typically experience emotion, and in fact, It may well violate your deepest beliefs about how the mind works, about where humans come from, and about why we act and feel as we do. Yet, the theory consistently predicts and explains the scientific evidence on emotion, including plenty of evidence that the classical view struggles to make sense of. Why should you care which theory of emotion is correct? Well, because the belief in the classical view affects your life in ways you may not realize. Think about the last time you went through airport security, where the taciturn agents of Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, x-rayed your shoes and evaluated your likelihood as a terrorist threat. Not long ago, a training program called SPOT, S-P-O-T, standing for Screening Passengers by Observation Techniques, this program taught those TSA agents to detect deception and assess risk based on facial and bodily movements, and the theory that such movements reveal your innermost feelings. That program didn't work, and it cost the taxpayers $900 million. We need to understand emotion scientifically so government agents won't detain us, or so they won't overlook those who actually do pose a threat based on some incorrect view of emotion. Now, imagine that you're in a doctor's office complaining of chest pressure and shortness of breath, which may be heart attack symptoms. If you're a woman, you are much more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety and sent home. Whereas if you're a man, you're more likely to be diagnosed with heart disease and receive life saving preventative care. As a result, women over age 65 die more frequently of heart attacks than men do. The perceptions of doctors, nurses, and the female patients themselves are shaped by the classical view beliefs that they can detect emotions like anxiety and that women are inherently more emotional than men. And this is bringing about fatal consequences. Belief in the classical view can even start wars. The Gulf War in Iraq was launched in part because Saddam Hussein's half brother thought he could read the emotions of the American negotiators, and he informed Saddam that the United States wasn't serious about attacking. The subsequent war claimed the lives of 175,000 Iraqis and hundreds of coalition forces. She goes on and says, we are, I believe, in the midst of a revolution in our understanding of emotion, the mind, and the brain. A revolution that may compel us to radically rethink such central tenets of our society as our treatments for mental and physical illness, our understanding of personal relationships, our approaches to raising children, and ultimately our very view of ourselves. Other scientific disciplines have seen revolutions of this kind, each one a momentous shift away from centuries of common sense. Physics moved from Isaac Newton's intuitive ideas about time and space to Albert Einstein's more relative ideas, and eventually to quantum mechanics. In biology, scientists carved up the natural world into fixed species, each having a central ideal form, until Charles Darwin introduced the concept of natural selection. Scientific revolutions tend to emerge not from a sudden discovery, but by asking better questions. How are emotions made if they aren't simply triggered reactions? Why do they vary so much? And why have we believed for so long that they have distinctive fingerprints? These questions, in and of themselves, can be delightfully interesting to ponder, but taking pleasure in the unknown is more than just a scientific indulgence. It is part of the spirit of adventure that makes us human. So she goes on to say that in the following pages, I invite you to share the adventure with me. Chapters 1 through 3 introduce the new science of emotion, how psychology, neuroscience, and related disciplines are moving away from the search for emotional fingerprints and are instead asking questions like how are emotions constructed? Chapters 4 through 7 explain how exactly emotions are made, and chapters 8 through 12 explore the practical, real world implications of this new theory of emotions on our approaches to health, emotional intelligence, child rearing, personal relationships, systems of law, and even human nature itself. To close the book, chapter 13 reveals how the science of emotion illuminates the age old mystery of how a human brain creates a human mind. So that's my offering for today. Some evidence, in quotes, evidence, close quotes, some data points that have been used over time to create a belief that your emotions are beyond your control and they're caused by the world around you and what people say or do or events happening or not happening as you want them to. And understanding that those same data points, when examined more closely or rearranged, give far better evidence for theories like those that say we construct our emotions, that we are taught the belief patterns and ways of interpreting life events, which are then used by us moment to moment to either create an emotion or dissipate an emotion. And again, the reason for this is because it's the fundamental set of tools uh, that evolved around this from Dr. Michael Ryce. The reality management worksheet, the mind shifter targeted journaling tool, the 3 early memories of conflict tool, the mind goal management sheet, the codependence to interdependence worksheet. None of those tools would be of any value whatsoever if what this woman is calling the classical view of emotions was accurate. Each and every one of those tools only has relevance if indeed I'm the one choosing an interpretation and a meaning for life events. And once I choose that interpretation and pour my mind energy into it, that's resonating old beliefs I've been taught, old intellectual patterns, experiences from the past. And that's how I create and experience my emotions moment to moment. It's the only way to make sense of how I can be at a 7 or an 8 or a 9 3/4 less level of rage or sadness or fear when I begin a worksheet process, and I can be at, down to a 4 or a 5 or a level 2 or 0 upset at the end of a worksheet process when in fact nothing has changed in the outside world. And the people that my mind was telling me were causing my emotions minutes before don't even know that I'm doing a worksheet. And they haven't changed anything about what they've said or done or what they're willing to do in the future. And yet my upset level can be dramatically transformed through the application of these tools. So if you're listening to somebody and they're talking on a podcast, or you overhear a conversation at a car dealership, or you're out at the grocery store and you hear something or see something that strikes you in a certain way, if you experience a negative emotional state and your mind tells you it's because of what you just witnessed outside of you, it's never the truth. There are tremendous, powerful intervening factors within you that are responsible for the emotions you create and experience. And if you're empowered with that knowledge and further empowered with the tools that you've practiced to be able to manage those forces within inside you, those choices and interpretations within inside you, now you're empowered to create a more loving, a more calm, centered, creative experience of life moment to moment. And that's what we're here to support. So if you hear somebody talking about something in the politics in the world today, or you hear about the results of some election that you were hoping would go to the left and instead it went to the right, or you're hoping it would go down instead of up and it went up instead of down, and then in response you feel rage or you feel fear or you feel sadness, this work gives you the wherewithal to change those emotional states, to restore yourself to a more calm, centered, loving, compassionate internal experience so that when you look out through your eyes, you see, you feel, you experience life differently. So I'll take a breath. I'll ask for comments, questions. Is it making sense? Is it going against everything you've ever thought or believed about the way your emotions are created? Um, if you're on the Needle app, please feel free to type in a comment or tap the phone icon to talk to us directly. If you're listening through the internet at live.needle.com/mindshiftersradio, we're glad you're here, but you don't have the option to comment or speak to us directly. So for that, you'd have to download the Needle app, open it, log in, answer a few questions, and then give us some feedback. Let us know. Uh, we had a support group last night, and we had a somewhat bizarre set of circumstances where I was moved to show the Dr. Quantum cartoon about the double slit experiment in quantum physics. There's a comment from Sally that says, I'm so thankful that I can read Lisa's book and hear this episode again. Very helpful for the work I'm doing now, personally and professionally. Well, glad to hear it. Um, thanks for listening and commenting, Sally. Um, so we were in the support group last night. Again, the support groups happen from 6:30 to 9 p.m. Central Time on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they're absolutely free. And all the information you would need to join us in those support groups is available on the mindshiftersacademy.org website, mindshiftersacademy.org, and there's a separate info page for the Tuesday login and a separate info page for the Thursday login. And we were in that group and listening to, we began listening to a Q&A from the original channelings of the Way of Mastery, because somebody asked, can you explain a little bit more about how there's a theory that says all events are neutral, and yet I don't experience most of the time, I don't experience all events as being neutral. I experience events as being sad, scary, overwhelming, frustrating, rage inducing, etc. And as we listened to the Q&A, which is about a 12-minute segment of a channeling that JM did back between 94 and 97, it raised a few questions, and people were debating whether or not it made sense. And something about our conversation led me to play this 5 or 7 minute video. You can find it on YouTube if you search for Dr. Quantum, What the Bleep. It's a small segment from the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, or What the Bleep Down the Rabbit Hole, where the cartoon character explains the original double slit experiment, which helped demonstrate that particles sometimes act as particles and sometimes act as waves. That light sometimes acts as a particle and sometimes acts as a wave. And this was mind boggling to the people that discovered this in this experiment, especially when they realized that the closer they looked at it, the more the fact of them looking and observing changed the way the energies behaved. So if they were looking directly at these energies, they behaved more like a particle. And when they weren't looking at them directly, they behaved more like a wave. I played that little video in the group last night just as a little nudge for people to expand their mind, to start to question what they believe they know, and to move closer and closer to what had come out in the Q&A from JM and the Way of Mastery in lesson 9 that said, we don't really know anything. And here's an exercise. Walk around in your life and take a few minutes to pick up an object, pick up a book, and understand that you don't know where that book came from. You don't know what those pages are made of. If it's a hardback book, you don't know what the cover's made of. You don't know what human being first had the idea for writing or what human being first had the idea for making a book, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you train yourself to be aware of the actuality about how little you know about your life and about the world around you, then you open yourself to learning more. How could it be that what seems so solid to me, the chair I'm sitting in, the desk in front of me, how could it be that it's made up of molecules that are made up of atoms that are 99.999% empty space? And that what isn't empty space in those atoms, we used to think was particles, like electrons, protons, and neutrons, but the more they developed more refined tools for observing, the more they saw these things that look like particles are really energy packets. And the more they observed those energy packets, they saw that those energy packets were blinking in and out of existence. So, how can I soften every time I think I know I'm right? And then I experience a tightness or a tension or an anger. And this goes to any time I've been experiencing an upset. This is triggered by, or this is my chosen response to how people were getting so triggered to upset from what they thought they were hearing on Monday's first hour of the internet radio show that we call Mind Shifters Radio that you're listening to now. I tried to say that accurately so that people thought they were being triggered to upset. They were actually creating their own upset, but they thought they were being triggered to upset because of what they thought they were hearing being said. And it resulted in name calling and swearing, and we talked about how that whole process only reveals to those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. If I'm name calling or swearing at someone or about, I think it's about something, all it means to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear is that I have pain, fear, or sadness inside of me that I do not feel capable of or I'm not willing to address internally at its source. And all of the work we do, all of the tools that Michael and Jeannie make available for absolute free financially. I mean, it costs you in terms of your time and your intelligence and your energy. You have to actually pick up the tools and apply them to yourself. So there's a cost to you in a sense, but it's not a financial cost. But all of the tools that they make available for free are designed to help you first become aware of what that internal process is that creates your emotions and your responses. And second, learn and then practice so you increase your proficiency at using those tools effectively and more efficiently over time. Use them for what end? To make your life more, I like to use the phrase, to make your life more safe, more sane, and more livable because you choose to engage the causative process at the cause level within you. You choose to recognize that your mind energy is a creative force and that you, as an individual, have been given dominion over that mind energy, that you have the infinite capacity to choose the focus of your conscious awareness in each new present moment. And it is the focus of your conscious awareness in each new present moment which actually creates your experience of life. So it's entirely possible that someone could listen to the very same audio signals that we were putting out in the air on Monday and be filled with joy, be filled with hope, be filled with happiness. Or they could be bored to tears and decide to turn it off because they're bored. Or they could be choosing to focus their mental emotional energy in ways that generates an intense anger. And then they could choose to just stay quiet and bite their tongue. Or they could choose to bark out at somebody or type an insult or a swear word. It's it's becoming aware. The point of this work is for me to become aware that I'm the one who has dominion over that creative process. And that despite what my culture and my family have taught me, it's never been forced on me the way I've been led to believe. Which, for those of us who are willing to take that leap and explore it, ends up being very liberating. It is really, really a nice thing in my life these days to understand that when I'm sad, when I'm scared, when I have anger or fear or hurt active in my energy system, I can choose to look at it, to figure out how I'm generating that, and if it makes sense for me in the moment, how to change it so that my perception is clarified and my vision is more accurate and my understanding of my the world around me and my role in it is more congruent and synergistically positive, and I find it a much more viable set of options for being a blessing to myself and others moment to moment that simply isn't available to me when I choose to create bitterness or resentment or hurt or anger. So again, in recap, we were reading today from the book. Excuse me for just a minute while I pull it up. My Kindle closed out for a minute. The book is titled How Emotions Are Made: The Secret Life of the Brain by Lisa Feldman Barrett, Barrett. And we read through the introduction and um, a couple little segments about how the search for emotional fingerprints and how emotions are constructed. And and that's what we did today to try and help people understand how thoroughly empowered they can become to manage their inner life, their emotional experiences, their interpretations of events, etc. We have just a few minutes left if somebody wants to type a comment or raise a hand to say hello. It's my understanding on this Wednesday that Michael and Jeannie will be here for a second hour. Again, please remember that you probably have to close out your app and open it up again when Michael and Jeannie go live. I have experienced all this week that I did not get a text when we went live. So I don't know what's happening with the Needle system. Um, but generally, what's supposed to happen is every time one of us goes live, the 70 or 80 or 100 and some people who have followed the show are supposed to get a notification on their phone. And that hasn't been happening this week. So I thank all of you who are on the call listening, even though I don't believe you got a text message today, that you've chosen to join us anyway. And if you did get a text message, please let me know in the comments. Um, there are times when Michael and Jeannie start their second hour and the system is sending out a text message, but Michael and Jeannie didn't take the time to change, so it says the first hour again with Tim Hayes. But these are little rough spots in the technology that we hope to work out over time with our Needle app and the experience of the live shows we're creating and the archives that we make available wherever you get your podcasts. So within a few hours after the show, you should be able to go to your chosen podcast source, whether it's Apple or Spotify or Amazon or iHeartRadio or wherever they carry the podcasts and get access to the replay. So I will remind us all that we come from love. We're made of the stuff we call love. We actually are love, and everything else is false.